head of Presidential Council affirms commitment to the UN-brokered truce despite repeated Houthi violations. The United Nations mission to support the Hudaydah Agreement says people coming into the city for Eid to avoid mines-planted areas. The government forces defend Houthi militia attacks in Ma'rib Governorate. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shazza Abdelbay. The head of the Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad Al-Alimi, called on Yemeni intellectuals to support the council. Al-Alimi addressed to the nation on the eve of Eid al-Fitr that awareness of the challenges puts Yemenis before their responsibility, which accepts nothing but success. He pledged that the temporary capital Aden will be rehabilitated and improved during the coming period. The head of the PLC, Rashad Al-Alimi, chaired a meeting of the Council of Ministers in the temporary capital Aden. The head of the PLC called for intensifying efforts to implement urgent priorities in all economic, security, and humanitarian fields. Al-Alimi briefed the cabinet on the results of the successful visit to Saudi Arabia and UAE. Al-Alimi outlined that an agreement was reached on the formation of joint committees to follow up the implementation of pledges in the fields of electricity, energy, health, roads, water, and dams. He pointed out that the support allocated to the central bank is under implementation. Yemen is celebrating today the Feast of Fitr. On this occasion, UN Special Envoy to Yemen Hans Grunberg congratulated all Yemenis for Eid al-Fitr. Grunberg expressed his wish that his values of gratitude, compassion, and tolerance inspire the Yemenis and help them in bringing an end to the conflict. In the same context, ambassadors of the EU, France, Britain extended their congratulations to all Yemenis for the feast. With the advent of Eid al-Fitr, citizens in Aden are keen to buy sweets and nuts despite the hard conditions. Popular markets are crowded with citizens in a joyful scene to celebrate Eid al-Fitr. This report has more details.
Many citizens are keen to receive the blessed Eid al-Fitr by buying feast sweets, which is an annual tradition, as they are presented on the morning of the first day and the rest of the feast days to complete the joy of the holy month. Visitors and wishers come over to each other's houses to celebrate the feast, and they bring their children along with them too, as a declaration of joy on this great religious occasion, and in recognition of God's grace for completing the fasting of the holy month. And here is in the interim capital Aden, with the deterioration of local currency and in light of low purchasing power, yet citizens are keen to show the joy of the feast. A demand for Eid sweets in Aden is increasing, and markets are crowded with citizens in a fabulous scene.
As for the Yemeni citizens, old customs and traditions are still preserved. With the advent of Eid al-Fitr, citizens insist to buy Eid requirements for their family. Therefore, we wish the government would help people to alleviate the suffering by reducing prices.
I came to this market as all Yemenis, especially Adeni people, are keen on buying nuts and sweets before Eid. Despite all the suffering the citizen is exposed to in liberated areas and other areas, but we can't stop doing this custom as it's rooted in our traditions.
Popular markets and shops specializing in the sale of Eid sweets are witnessing an increasing demand for candies, in which these shops provide different types of sweets, in addition to distinguished display methods that attract the customers to purchase them.
It's a matter of fact that citizens are going through hard conditions, but nuts are indispensable in Adani houses during Eid. We can't skip our traditions no matter what we are exposed to.
The interest in buying sweets also accompanies another interest in acquiring utensils, which are designed for serving sweets, as markets and shops currently display different types of these utensils in sizes and types, each of which has a different advantage over the others, and they are usually used to serve Eid sweets for the well-wishers.
UNMAHA appealed to citizens of Hudaydah and those visiting the governorate to be cautious. It said the people in the city and other visitors during Eid al-Fitr holiday should be careful from landmines and unexploded devices. The UN Humanitarian Coordinator in Yemen, David Gressly, urged all donors to fully fund the UN appeal and to commit to the speedy payment of funds, as the lack of sufficient funding from donors could stop the work of relief agencies. This report has more details.
Warnings are belling again about the collapse of the relief and humanitarian work in Yemen. The needs, according to the United Nations reports, require the provision of $4.3 billion urgently and quickly to help 17 million Yemenis. The humanitarian coordinator in Yemen, David Gressly, stressed in a recent statement that the worsening humanitarian crisis in Yemen needs urgent relief work, noting that the numbers this year are very shocking, as more than 23 million people need assistance. He added that this represents an increase of about 3 million people over the previous year, with approximately 13 million people have acute levels requiring urgent and long-term assistance. The truce is an opportunity for aid agencies to increase life-saving aids and reach more people, including in areas where access has been limited due to conflict and insecurity. According to the United Nations indicators, Yemen is the fourth largest internal displacement crisis in the world, and 19 million Yemenis are expected to need food assistance in the second half of this year, and 2.2 million children are still suffering from acute malnutrition, including more than 500,000 children at critical levels.
British Ambassador to Yemen Richard Oppenheim said the UK had drafted a resolution that could be considered an alternative to UN Security Council's Resolution 2216 on ending Yemen's war. He conditioned the approval on the new draft resolution on real agreement on a political settlement between the parties of the Yemeni conflict. He said the UN meditated truce as a golden opportunity for a comprehensive and sustainable peace. The Minister of Information Muammar al-Eryani said the Houthi militia continues to evade its obligations regarding the UN-brokered truce. He said the Houthi militia continues to block the opening of all crossings and roads to Taiz Governorate. Al-Eryani added that the government addressed the UN envoy with the names of the government team concerned with opening roads in Taiz, but the Houthi militia has refused to this day to open any discussion. On the other hand, the Yemeni government accused the Houthi rebels of violating the truce by refusing to pay the salaries of employees. Minister of Information Muammar al-Eryani said the Houthi militia did not commit to directing the revenues of oil derivatives to pay salaries in areas under its control. The government forces thwarted an attack by the Houthi militia on Al-Qassara front west of Ma'rib. Military sources said the Houthi militia launched an intense against the government forces and violent clashes erupted as the militia were inflicted with heavy losses in equipment and life. In Al-Jawf Governorate, government forces announced the death of one of its soldiers and another was injured. Military sources said the Houthi militia has intensified the construction of fortifications and reinforcements on Ma'rib front. The sources reported that the Houthi masses are backed by heavy equipment, noting that most of the reinforcements reach the northern and southern fronts. Local sources in the capital Sana'a reported that Houthi mobilization camps increased and they pushed dozens of new recruiters to training centers. Egyptian authorities succeeded in releasing 20 Egyptian fishermen who were held in Yemen over the past several days over charges of invading into Yemeni local water without a permit. The authorities confirmed that the sailors were all in good condition and received the necessary care, adding that preparations are ongoing to ensure their safe return to home. Coming next, the ongoing conflict and hard living conditions have overshadowed Eid celebrations across Yemen.
احنا نزحنا للمخيم ذا قدام 3 سنوات ونزحنا من الحرب وقعت بيننا عندنا في القرية اشتباكات عنيفة. الأمان مش أمان الحرب، الأمان إنك معك دور في بيتك، معك مصروف، تكون مأمن نفسك داخل بيتك أنت وعيالك. الجوع خلانا فكر كثير. ما يكون البر موجود كل شيء موجود ترقد وانت من مرتاح ما يكون ما فيش من ترقد.
Welcome back. Eid al-Fitr this year has coincided with the World Labor Day, yet Yemenis nationwide struggle to celebrate both occasions due to the hard living conditions. This report has more details.
30-year-old Nabil Abdulrahman is one of hundreds of thousands of daily wage workers who suffer from difficult and harsh living conditions. They don't know anything about the Labor Day, which unjustly bears their name, except that it's an occasion in which the tragedies and suffering of the unemployment are recalled.
Today is the International Labor Day. However, currently in Yemen we don't have a Labor Day or joy for anything, not even Ramadan. We don't have available job opportunities, and the unemployment rates are increasing a lot. In Ramadan, we couldn't provide our families with enough food supplies or clothing. We don't have a source of income.
This year's International Labor Day coincides with the blessed Eid al-Fitr, and the employees and workers alike are far from that joyful atmosphere as a result of the war that turned their lives into an unbearable hell, and the interruption of the salaries and the irregularity of their disbursement to others, in addition to the loss of the majority of their jobs, which prompted many of them to search for other jobs, even if it's hard and tiring, in order to meet their life demands.
On these days, we have the International Labor Day and Eid al-Fitr, but these occasions don't include us, as we don't take our salaries and we don't have a social insurance. We are living with our children, not knowing the beginning or the end of the Eid. How long are we supposed to wait? The worker in Yemen lives in a very complicated and hard conditions. The financial situation is really hard. Unfortunately, the joy and happiness disappears amid the continuous deterioration of the living conditions and the collapse of the national currency. Many workers and employees lost their jobs and have financial problems because of the deterioration of the national currency and the absence of their salaries.
Observers believe that the war ignited by the Houthi militia, which is entering its 8th year, has completely paralyzed the labor market and made many people lose their jobs and salaries, which are the basis of their lives. This is how the war swept away the majority of Yemenis, specifically the segment of employees and workers, into poverty and destitution. So how are they supposed to celebrate?
A massive fire broke out in a camp for the displaced people in Marib. Officials said a massive fire broke out in Joe and Nasim camp, causing a complete destruction of 4 tents of displaced families in the camp, in an incident that is the second in a month. No human casualties among the camp residents were reported. International aid agencies have voiced concerns over the possibility of stopping some of their programs because of tough funding crisis. This report has more details.
Corinne Fleischer, the World Food Programme's Middle East and North Africa Regional Director, said that despite Yemen suffering from the world's worst humanitarian crisis, donor money is dwindling. She claims that donor money has only covered 18% of the almost $2 billion needed by the WFP for its Yemen operations. The WFP needs $806 million more in the next 6 months to feed 13 million people. The deficit has already forced the United Nations to allocate funds for 5 million people in Yemen who are on the verge of famine, meaning that the remaining 8 million people are only getting half rations from the WFP. According to Fleischer, parents can go days without eating so they can give the food to their children. Many have returned to subsisting off of bread and tea, a diet that is wholly insufficient. She adds that people have resorted to collecting and eating leaves to survive. Last year, the WFP was able to avoid famine thanks to $1.4 billion in donations. However, the amount of money granted has dropped dramatically this year, which Fleischer ascribed to global needs shifting dramatically as a result of conflict, climate change, and COVID-19. The number of people who need food assistance has increased from 115 million to 280 million, so the demands have grown as well. Marcin Griffith, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, has also weighed in on the situation in a Security Council meeting on February 15th.
Mr. President, however, by far the biggest challenge for aid agencies right now is funding. The humanitarian operation, a lifeline for millions of people across Yemen and for these many years, is about to start doing a lot less. Aid agencies are quickly running out of money, forcing them to slash life-saving programs. And by the end of January, nearly two-thirds of major UN aid programs had already scaled back or closed altogether. In December, the World Food Programme reduced food rations for 8 million people. And starting next month, those 8 million people may get no food at all, or just a reduced ration.
According to the UN, more needs to be done in the long run to reduce humanitarian needs sustainably, including coordinated efforts to strengthen Yemen's economy. Meanwhile, urgent funding is needed to keep the humanitarian operation running and avoid a spike in people's suffering.
Wars not only kill citizens but also damage steady economies. This is exactly the situation in Yemen. This report has more details.
The United Nations expected that the economic environment in Yemen will continue to deteriorate during the current year as a result of the diminishing access to income, lack of fuel supplies, and increase in the value of the Yemeni rial. OCHA warned that the livelihood situation remains largely unchanged across the country amid the erosion of the purchasing power of many Yemenis. It added that there is a potential that food supplies will face challenges arising from the war in Ukraine, as Yemen imports a large share of its needs of Russian and Ukrainian wheat. On the other hand, the majority of Yemeni families have resorted to buying Eid clothes for their children from second-hand clothing markets, which have become a haven for them as a result of the crazy rise in the prices of clothes in shops. Trade sources said the price of clothes have doubled this year, despite the weak demand. Traders justify the high prices of clothes due to the high transportation costs, the rising rent of shops, the deterioration of the national currency, and the high custom fees on imported goods, in addition to the levies as security checkpoints. In chicken slaughterhouses in the capital Sana'a, a number of shops closed their doors due to the high prices of poultry in the local market. Local sources said chickens were supplied in a very small sizes with doubled prices.
Economic sources estimated the amount of corruption at Al Wadi'a land port on the Yemeni-Saudi border. According to official statistics, the daily looted amounts were estimated at more than $500 million Saudi riyal annually. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Head of Presidential Council affirms commitment to the UN-brokered truce despite repeated Houthi violations. The United Nations mission to support the Hudaydah Agreement says people coming into the city for Eid to avoid mines-planted areas. The government forces defend Houthi militia attacks in Ma'rib. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.